This is part 2 of the chapter 23 lecture notes. We're going to begin with the phylum Bryophyta, or the bryophytes. This group of plants is the only group that are non-vascular. Since they don't contain vascular tissue, they're not tall plants, they're very short. They're very close to the water source, which is in the soil, or somewhere like a rock or bark of a tree, wherever mosses grow. Okay, some important facts about the bryophytes is that their dominant generation is the gametophyte structure. They produce eggs in a structure called the archegonia, so that's the female gametophyte, and then they produce sperm with flagella. That means their sperm swim, which means that they have to have a water source. They don't have to be aquatic, but there has to be enough water available that the sperm can swim to the egg. So it doesn't have to be all the time, but they do have to grow in, wetter soil, wetter conditions. So they produce sperm. Their sperm are flagellated, and those structures that produce the sperm are called antheridia. The archegonia would be the female gametophyte. The antheridia would be the male gametophyte. And again, the sperm will swim to the egg. That's how they'll get to the egg and to fertilize it. The only reason I just highlighted liverwort, because you need to know that liverworts are bryophytes. Here are some pictures of liverworts. You find these growing in the forest. Hornworts are also bryophytes. They look a little different. And then we have the mosses, which we will concentrate the most on. The mosses are our primary example of bryophytes. They're the largest phyla, the largest group of non-vascular plants. Examples of mosses are peat mosses, granite mosses, and true mosses. Now, when we get to our next phylum, which is the lycophytes, we call those club mosses, but that's not a true moss. Just because they're called mosses, they don't belong with the rest of the mosses. And I know that's confusing, but just remember, club mosses are in a different phylum from all the other mosses. Okay, so peat moss, granite moss, true moss, all of these are bryophytes, and they are in with the group of actual moss plants. All right, looking at the life cycle, this is the alternation of generations life cycle, so you can see how it works for a moss plant. We can look at the structures here. You can see the little mossy green structure is the gametophyte plant. And then the sporophyte is the stalk with the capsule. The sporophyte only grows out of the archegonium, so only grows out of the female gametophyte, which is shown here. This is the female gametophyte, and this is what the male gametophyte looks like. You would never see a sporophyte growing out of the male gametophyte. It only is going to grow out of the female. It's going to start with the fertilized egg and then grow a stalk and a capsule out of the female gametophyte. So we have the spores are formed in the sporophyte capsule in a structure called the sporangium. They're formed by meiosis. So the spores are haploid. They will find a place. They will land on, some moist soil, and they will germinate or grow by mitosis into the male and female gametophyte structures, which look like this. And the male gametophyte will produce flagellated sperm that will swim to the egg in the female gametophyte. Remember, the male gametophyte is called the antheridia, and the female is called the archegonia. So this is the egg, these are the sperm, they swim to the egg and fertilize it, and that will form into a diploid zygote within the archegonia. The zygote will divide by mitosis and form into this stalk with a capsule. We call it the sporophyte generation. So that's an overview of the life cycle, the alternation of generations life cycle for the moss plant. Now we're going to move on to phylum Lycophyte, which are our club mosses. They are vascular plants, called tracheophytes. Vascular plants in general are called tracheophytes. And most of our land plants are vascular. They contain vascular tissue called xylem and phloem. The xylem tissue conducts water and minerals up from the roots. The conducting cells within the xylem tissue are strengthened by a material called lignin. Lignin strengthens the cell walls of the xylem tissue. Remember, all plant cell walls contain cellulose, but lignin is an extra component of the cell walls of the xylem, the conducting cells in the xylem tissue. Then the phloem tissue conducts sucrose and other organic compounds, so you can just basically call it food. The food that is made in the leaves is conducted throughout the plant, all over the plant, all the way down to the roots even. So the carbohydrates that are produced as food when the plant makes its own food, that material is conducted through the phloem tissue. Lycophytes have leaves that are very small, so we call them microphylls. They only have one strand of vascular tissue, so basically one vein that runs through the middle of the leaf, and that is the definition of a microphyll. They do have cone-shaped structures called strobili, and those strobili produce spores, so these are not seed plants. The spores can either grow into a male or a female gamete, or they can grow into a gamete that has both male and female structures on it. So if it's just a male or a female, we call that homosporous. And if it has both male and female, we call it heterosporous. And the male gametophytes come from microspores. The female gametophytes come from megaspores. And that's pretty easy to remember because sperm are usually small, micro, and eggs are usually large, mega. So the male gametophytes develop from microspores and the female gametophytes develop from megaspores. Ground pines or Lycopodium, which is also called, I better write this. Maybe I can write it. Okay, I told you they were called club mosses. CLUB, club mosses. The ground pines or Lycopodium are also called club mosses, and these, remember, are in the phylum Lycophyte. And that's our primary example that we're going to look at. You can see the structures called strobili, almost look like cones. They're scale-like. And then the little tiny leaves called microphylls. And this is what a club moss would look like. Now we're going to move on to our next group of seedless vascular plants, the phylum Pteridophyte or Pteridophyta. Their leaves are larger and they have more than one strand of vascular tissue, so we call them megaphylls. Some examples of the Pteridophyta are horsetails, which look like this. They also have strobili. Horsetails, and I'm going backwards, I'm so sorry. Horsetails, whisk ferns, and then regular, just what we know as a fern, the tropical looking fern that you see sometimes growing in hanging baskets. So the pteridophytes contain horsetails, whisk ferns, and ferns. They are seedless vascular plants. Their leaves are called megaphylls. The horsetails all belong to one genus, Equisetum, because equus means horse. And most horsetails inhabit wet, marshy environments. Their stems are tough and rigid. because of silica deposited in the cell walls. Silica is glass. And this is what a horsetail looks like. Whisk ferns come from the genus Psilotum and Mesipteris, but just whisk ferns is fine. And they resemble brooms. And this is what they're going to look like, kind of like a broom, the end of a broom. All right, so this is a whisk fern. And then the ferns are going to be the plant that we will focus on the most from the phylum Pteridophyta. So just for a review, the phylum Bryophyte, our main plant is the moss. The phylum Lycophyte, our main plant is the club moss or ground pine. Same exact thing, club moss or ground pine. And then our primary plant in the phylum Pteridophyta is the fern. And ferns are most abundant in warm, moist tropical regions. They are large. They have large conspicuous megaphylls, and they're called fronds. Their leaves are called fronds. They have clusters called sori that grow on the underside of the frond. They're little brown dots, and we'll look at a picture in a minute. And they do produce wind-blown spores. And their sperm are flat. They do contain flagella, so they do swim. So the fern must grow in a kind of a moist environment, or at least moist, for some of the time during its life cycle. So the sperm have to swim from the Antheridium to the Archegonium, very similar to the Bryophytes and the Lycophytes, and fertilization occurs in the Archegonium. Here is a fern tree. Here's some examples where you can see the fern frond. This would be a fern frond right here. And with the fern, the sporophyte generation starts out as a fiddlehead. Fiddleheads are actually edible, and they're good. People will go out into the woods and collect fiddleheads and cook them. So the fiddlehead is the young sporophyte of the fern plant. They're very tender, they're just cooked like you would greens, So this is the sporophyte generation. Is what it looks like when it grows up. It's the dominant generation of the fern plant. The gametophyte is a heart-shaped leaf-like structure. This is the gametophyte here. It's got a sporophyte growing up out of it, but the heart-shaped leaf that grows, this is a good picture too. The heart-shaped leaf that grows flat against the ground, that's the gametophyte generation. But the dominant generation is the sporophyte, which is this, what you recognize as a fern plant, is the sporophyte generation. So on the gametophyte, you have the male and female structures together. So you have the Archegonium and you have the Antheridium. These are the Antheridium and these are the Archegonium. They grow on that same gametophyte structure. And the sperm will swim to the egg and fertilize it. And then the zygote, which is diploid, will grow up out of the Archegonium. So it will grow up out, and that will become the sporophyte, which is the dominant generation. The sori grow, they're like these little brown dots on the underside of the fern fronds. And inside of them will be the spores, and they'll burst open and release the spores. I was going to see. They don't show any good pictures of spores. You know what? Give me a minute. So if you look here, this is a picture of the underside of a fern frond, and you can see these little these round brown dots on the underside, and those are going to contain the spores. These are what we call sori. Okay. And going back to our notes. Ferns have economic uses and medicinal uses. Edible ferns are used as a food source. I just showed you the fiddleheads, which are immature sporophytes, and those are edible. Native Americans use them as an astringent to stop bleeding during childbirth. The maidenhair fern is a source of a cold medicine. And of course, we have decorative ferns. Ferns are very pretty. They're used in decorative bouquets. They're used as ornamental plants. A lot of people have them as hanging basket plants. And then wood from the tropical tree ferns is often used as a building material because it resists termites. All right, we'll stop here.